Welcome to the Resume Storyteller, bringing you interviews with industry experts, regular folks who tested the job search waters and succeeded, and strategies to tell your story and land you job interviews. Here's your host, Virginia Franco.
Guys, I have with me two board director search firm experts, Lisa Ward and Adam Zajac. Both work for JamesDruryPartners, which is one of America's foremost board advisory services firms with clients that span industry and range from 100 million all the way to 260 billion in revenue. They have advised the boards of major corporations regarding governance policy, director evaluations, best practices, CEO succession, and introduced qualified candidates for IPOs and spinouts, and even replaced retiring directors and reinvigorated legacy boards. Lisa is a senior partner with JamesDruryPartners, and she brings to the table decades of experience performing board director search assignments, corporate governance consulting, and much more. And then Adam is a head writer and editor for JamesDruryPartners. And he brings to the table experience as a certified resume writer, career branding expert, and he has written career marketing collateral for America's premier business leaders and Fortune 500 C-suite executives. Adam and Lisa, thank you so much for joining me. This is a topic that, it's very niche, but also there's a lot that's not known about it. So I appreciate you coming on.
Sure. Thank you for having us.
Happy to be here.
So you heard me sort of rattle off a little bit about the organization that you work with, but I'd love to hear from you exactly how JamesDruryPartners helps companies and executives to get into the world of, the board world. That's a horrible term, but.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having us, and happy to take this first question. So JamesDruryPartners is a boutique firm. We specialize in corporate governance consulting. So everything that we do is in the board space. We conduct traditional board searches, whereby a board would retain us to help them recruit a new director, typically against a pretty defined spec, either because they're looking to backfill someone who might be retiring, or they've potentially identified a skills gap that they want to fill. We also offer a unique model, which was innovated by our founder and named partner, Jim Drury, about 16 years ago. We call it Board Select. And it's essentially a reverse engineered process whereby boards retain us to advise their CEO or someone else within the C-suite on finding an appropriate and meaningful external board on which to serve. It's as I said, a unique to our firm, this process and this approach, and it really enables our client executives and their boards, to the extent their boards want to play a part in this, to really play a strategic role in selecting the optimal board, one which is aligned with that client executive's professional interest and objectives, as well as the strategic priorities of their companies. And it's just an interesting and new way to think about the process versus the historical way this would always happen, which is the executive would wait to see what kind of inbounds they might get from traditional search firms or boards not working on their own behalf.
No, it's very proactive versus reactive.
Correct.
I love that. So as a writer, this podcast mostly supports job seekers. And I think there's a lot of confusion around the different kinds of boards, what they, what are the responsibilities, whether they're paid or not unpaid. And I know that there are, there's nonprofits board, there's startup boards, there's public companies. Could you sort of walk us through high level view? What are the core differences between those three?
Sure. I'll start with nonprofits. I'll let Lisa speak to the others you asked about. But yeah, I consider most nonprofit boards pretty much in a category of their own. Board structure will often vary by the type of nonprofit, but one of the most common that many of your listeners might be familiar with is a 501c3, which is going to be a charitable organization. And board directors for those types of organizations are often unpaid positions. So in fact, those board members might actually be expected to make a charitable donation themselves for the privilege of serving on the board. And they're also going to have some type of either a personal connection or a personal passion about the mission of that nonprofit. Responsibilities, of course, are going to vary from board to board and function to function, but like for-profit boards, 501c3s are often going to have board committees. So serving on a nonprofit's budget and finance committee, for instance, can provide some useful experience that might prepare a board director for service outside of the nonprofit space. However, nonprofit board service isn't considered a prerequisite for for-profit board service, and the experience gained, by itself or in a vacuum is unlikely to qualify the individual for service outside of the nonprofit space. Now, of course, there's some exceptions. There's, for instance, there's currently a financial services firm on the Fortune 500 right now, but it is set up as a nonprofit, but run very much like a business. But by and large, serving on the board of a local community charity is not going to get you considered for service on the board of a multi-billion-dollar energy company.
So with the nonprofit, you're expected, and Adam, you and I have both served on the National Resume Writers Association board for several years. You're expected to pitch in your either sweat equity or possibly even financial equity.
Correct. Yeah. The financial equity is oftentimes going to be those charitable ones. So 501c3s, I know we're on a nonprofit, but it's set up as an association. There's a different designation for that. So instead of contributing monetarily, we're definitely volunteering our time and expertise.
Okay. So Lisa, can you walk us through what's involved in serving on a startups board?
Sure, yeah. And I would say from a standpoint of the responsibilities, serving on either a startup or an established public company, the responsibilities are the same. Essentially, it's a fiduciary responsibility. The board members are in charge of making sure that the direction of travel is correct. And that kind of, again, doesn't matter where a company is in its evolution, whether it's brand new or a well-established company. What I would tell you is that then when you think about what that means for a startup versus an established company, that's where there's really kind of a difference. Startups tend to be focused on commercialization and growth and figuring out how to get the company to the next stage. Established public companies, on the other hand, have gotten to where they need to be, but they have challenges that are unique to well-established businesses, such as, okay, how do we, for example, transformation, that's a big word we're hearing a lot these days. How are we thinking about ESG? How are we thinking about complexity of supply chain problems or whatever it might be? And those are unique to each organization. But at the core of it, the responsibility of a board member, regardless of where a company is, age and stage, doesn't change.
Okay, that is good to know. So is it fair to say, given what you said about startups focusing on commercialization and growth, do you need to have experience in fundraising, getting seed funding, that kind of thing? Or is it again depend on the organization?
I would say no if it is a public company. If it's a startup company that is still in the age and stage where it's early stage, then yes, they might be tapping their board members to help them figure out financing. But for the most part, in terms of what we deal with here at JamesDruryPartners, it would be startup companies that have reached the point where they've gone public. In which case, they're relying far more on their board members for bigger picture kind of expertise, as opposed to being connected to like VCs or private equity.
Okay, that helps me. Okay, so now, in terms of, are there any other differentiators that are worth calling out then when you're recruiting for an established public company that we haven't talked about in the startup phase?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult to answer that question because it varies from company to company.
Sure.
They all are going to have different priorities in terms of what is most important to them. If they're, for example, actively seeking to add to their board, they're going to have an ideal profile that's unique to that situation. Perhaps they're looking for a qualified financial expert, someone who can eventually chair their audit committee. Most of them are looking for, people who have been in business leadership roles, meaning someone who has run a P&L or even a sitting CEO versus a functional leader like a CHRO or general counsel. But every one of these is different. So it's really hard to answer that in a.
Okay. So it sounds like there's a gap that needs to be filled, and whatever that knowledge gap is, you're looking to fill it, whether it's HR or finance or sales or what have you.
Correct. And it's a gap either that isn't represented today on the board or that the board might be losing as a result of a retirement.
Okay. Okay, that was really helpful. Thank you. I get those questions a lot. And honestly, I didn't know really the differences between the different phases of startup. I think, and that's an important distinction that, there's ones that are well established and or have been PE funded for a year. And then there's bootstrapped ones where the needs are very different.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, Virginia, it varies by industry too. When you think about, for example, a biotech startup that isn't yet public, if you look at those boards, they're populated by the PhDs, the scientists who are helping to figure out whatever the molecule is that they're trying to eventually try to commercialize, versus, for example, let's say an early stage pre-public retail company. That's going to require a different kind of expertise. But all of those at that phase of development are going to be focused on how do we scale this thing? How do we get it, if it's not public yet, how do we get it to a point where it's ready to go public? And once it's gone public, then it's really important, because if you think about those small companies at that stage when they've just newly gone public, they are, until they grow to a certain size, they're probably an acquisition target for somebody. So the board members are thinking about how do we scale this thing to get to, if the goal is to get it to a size where it's a company that isn't going to be an acquisition target, how do we get there?
Okay. Yeah, you're right. They're all the commonalities are trying to drive scale.
Correct.
Okay. So let's talk about career marketing collateral, which to me is a LinkedIn, a resume, a bio. Are there differences in how they need to be written when one is a job seeker versus a board seeker?
Sure, I'll take this one. Yeah, the short answer is yes, very much so. So, just broadly speaking about executives, I think everyone should have, a well-written, visually appealing, high-quality resume, really good, strong bio, strong LinkedIn profile. But if that executive is seeking to join, particular a public company board, the content contained in their resume and bio is going to vary somewhat significantly from one that's used to land their next executive role at another company. A good way to think about it, I think, is by the time the executive is being considered for service on the board of a large public company, it's already assumed that they're both highly qualified and accomplished. So we're not going to spend as much time focusing or emphasizing the individual achievements or specific successes that they may have had. Instead, boards are often looking for directors who are broadly experienced in business, have been consistently successful in driving their company's performance, and are the type of person that are going to fit in well on the board for which they're being considered. So, in other words, are they going to fit in well with that particular board's culture? Are they an authentic and approachable person? Will they get along with their fellow directors at board dinners, things along those lines? Do they understand and respect the line of authority between executive management and board director? So if your bio and resume don't get those points across clearly, your chances of successfully landing a board service opportunity are going to diminish quite a bit. I could go into some specifics of things that we are oftentimes emphasizing for our clients, and anyone kind of considering those types of public board roles are definitely going to want to play up in there. It's not an all-inclusive list, but as Lisa alluded to before, having run a large company or a large business unit within a company, so that P&L management responsibility, that's always going to be desirable. Current or previous executive experience, just with large, widely respected, well-known business. Hands-on global business experience is oftentimes something that's sought after. Of course, past corporate board experience is going to be a big asset. Financial expertise. So, credentials or experience that qualifies that individual as a qualified financial expert. Again, as Lisa alluded to, or a QFE. Those could be things like, having served as a public company CFO, having your CPA, things along those lines. And then, we kind of get down into some more board level issues, but more specific ones, which are going to be more on a case-by-case basis. And those can be things like, a deep understanding of cybersecurity, or a lot of hands-on involvement with mergers and acquisitions, business transformation, ESG, or even diversity, equity, and inclusion matters. Those are all things that we may play up in the career branding with collateral.
So issues common to the large corporations are facing today.
Definitely. Yeah. The ones that are being faced by large corporations and that are, I guess, at the board level concerns. But I was just going to say, I would say anyone that wants to pursue that type of opportunity, that's kind of the baseline. Obviously here, JamesDruryPartners, we take it a few steps further than that. So instead of developing an individual's resume and a bio and a separate LinkedIn profile, we're creating this comprehensive document. We call it a board profile for each of our clients. And that is going to contain a background summary, which is similar to a bio. It's going to have an abbreviated resume, but it goes, like I said, well beyond that. It has a section that basically tells our client's life story. So where they came from, the inflection points and lessons learned throughout their life, things along those lines. Now we work with.
How long is that? Is that a 2-pager or does it depend?
Yeah, so that one section, the life story, we love to have it come in under 2 pages, but 2 pages tops, which makes my job writing those a bit of a challenge sometimes because we're working with really interesting,
many years of really cool experience. Yeah.
No, they're a lot of fun to write, but yeah, kind of weeding out the things that are impressive but not relevant to the audience is going to be really important there. And then again, we even go beyond that. We're including references, information, quotes from these individuals, references regarding their board readiness. We're speaking to specific strengths and attributes that make them board qualified, as it were. And those are all contained kind of in the self-contained board profile we do. And the reason for that is when we're approaching boards with a candidate, and even if you weren't using a firm, but you're going through the process, it's not send it to the head of HR and get called in for an interview and get a job offer. It's a very oftentimes lengthy process. It's going to go through many different hands. It may start at the nominating and governance committee chair, then go to the full committee. The board chairman and our CEO are likely to review it at some point. They're being seriously considered. The entire board is going to read through all of that. The CHRO or general counsel may get involved. So depending on where the candidate is in the process and depending on who is reading it, they're all going to have different areas that they're interested in at that time. And we find that a resume by itself or a bio by itself, or even those documents put together, are not going to sufficiently address all of those issues. So by developing something more comprehensive early on in the process, we find the rates of success are going to go up quite a bit.
So how long is an average board profile? If the life story piece is 2 pages, then you've got the abbreviated resume, the quotes, all of that.
Sure. So it's going to vary a bit, but I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 or 8 pages total.
Okay.
Obviously, these are, we want them to look pretty too, so they have elements of a cover sheets and things along those lines. But these are not, solid blocks of text on every page. But yeah, I would say
Sure.
700 pages.
Okay, so but it's very robust. And I appreciate, it's always important to know your audience. And in this case, the audience is the board committee as well as sounds like the executive leadership team.
Yeah, it can include those for sure, and even go beyond that, right, Lisa?
Yes, indeed. depending on where it is in the process.
Okay. All right. Well, you touched on this subject before, but in terms of the issues that are commonly faced by large corporations, you mentioned ESG, M&A, and DEI, and so I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into diversity, equity, inclusion, because it is an important topic when it comes to corporate hiring practices. Can you provide our audience with insight into DEI's role in the board space and how it is factoring into selection for board service today? Because I feel like this is something that really wasn't a discussion 5-10 years ago, at least not in the news.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I'll take this one, and I will tell you that, broadly speaking, DEI is top of mind for every board. They're all thinking about it. They're all aware of it. And they are embracing it wholeheartedly today in a way that you are absolutely correct. Probably wasn't the case. I wouldn't have said 5 years ago, because even 5 years ago, many boards were thinking about this. Certainly not 10 or 15 years ago, though. But the important thing to remember about diversity as it relates to boards is that first and foremost, boards want people who are broadly experienced and are ready to serve on a board, who have governance capabilities already established. So all this to say, diversity is really important, but no board wants to add someone simply for the sake of diversity. And quite honestly, no candidate wants to be added for that reason either. They want to be at that table because everyone around the table respects their experience and respects the insight that they're bringing, and not just because they're enable the company to check a box on the proxy about diversity.
Okay. The people that I work with come to me and they say, I want a resume, but I'd also be interested in starting to serve on board. So they're not ready for this high level, Fortune level board work. What is the best strategy, do you feel like, to help people gain board experience of any kind? How should people start?
Yeah, it's a terrific question, and it's one that we get all the time. And so my standard advice to people is, first and foremost, make sure you are ready and qualified for board service. What does that mean? Looking at your resume, looking at your career, do you have enough broad-based business experience to be considered for a board? Have you run a P&L? Have you run a business? What's been your exposure at your own company to your own boardroom? Are you regularly spending time in your own boardroom? Part of what makes someone qualified for board service before they've joined their first board is the opportunities they've had to listen to and learn from experienced board members. And where does that happen? Their own boardroom. So I would say, realistically looking at your experience and your qualifications and assessing whether or not you are ready for board service. And if you are not ready for board service, if you haven't had those opportunities, then I would encourage, I encourage anyone to talk to whoever you report to, whether that's your CEO or your COO or whomever it is, and let them know that you are really interested in this and that you understand you need to probably add a few more arrows to the quiver before you're going to be qualified or considered for board service, and ask them how they can help you get there. So it's really kind of two-pronged. It's first, are you ready? And if you are, then you go on to step B. And if you aren't yet ready, then you need to advocate for yourself within your own organization to get the people you report to help you become ready. Now, assuming you are ready and you're spending time in your own boardroom and you're at that stage of career where you would be considered qualified for board service, then very important step, make sure you have support to serve externally and permission. And what I mean by that is some companies, and fewer than there used to be, but there are some companies out there who do not want their senior executives serving externally. They want all of the bandwidth that person has to be directed at their day job. So,
Okay.
So making sure you've talked to, again, if your CEO or your CHRO, whoever within your organization is the one who would greenlight that kind of thing, to make sure you have permission to serve externally and you have their support to do so. Then it becomes an issue of networking. Part of that is going to happen when you talk to your CEO about, hey, I would really like to serve externally, and I would like your support to serve externally, and the CEO says yes, then the CEO becomes part of your network and can help you think about board opportunities, and if appropriate, advocate for you for board opportunities, recommend you for board opportunities. The same thing goes with everyone, for everyone within your network, people within your professional network, people within you, if you are already serving externally on a not-for-profit board, people on the not-for-profit board, making sure that they're aware that you are available for and interested in external board service, because a lot of this stuff does happen through word of mouth. There's a statistic that we like to share with people, which is that in any given 12-month period of time, in any given calendar year, only about 30% of the board appointments are made with the help of a search firm doing a traditional board search. In other words, going out there and actively recruiting for people. The other 70%, 30.
Oh, okay.
So the other 70% of board appointments, give or take, depending on the year, are made through these informal channels, whether it's a firm like ours, proactively representing a client executive, or whether it's boards simply networking on their own behalf, talking to other directors that they know and asking for recommendations when there's a potential vacancy to be filled. It happens that way more frequently than it happens via what we would call a traditional board search process. So networking to make sure everyone in your network, whoever those people might be, are aware of your interest in and availability for board service is really, really important.
So when you go, I have a question about number 2, the regularly spending.
Could I just tack on
sure.
one thing to what Lisa was saying there too, and of course spot on. I do, of course, I would advocate as the writer here too, make sure, if you are ready for that service and you're kind of going out and starting to do the networking and approaching, getting the permissions, et cetera, make sure your materials are prepared and positioned correctly, of course. So that's going to be big. And I did want to mention one other thing about, we talked about nonprofits and how that doesn't necessarily, the experience itself isn't necessarily going to get you in or on a public board. However, just off the top of my head right now, where we work with sometimes very, very large nonprofits, health systems, and as I mentioned, there's some financial institutions and so forth that are technically nonprofits, but oftentimes on those boards are public company or for-profit executives, from other companies. And so when you're networking and you're networking with people that are going to have board opportunities within their own companies, sometimes reaching out to them, whether you're connected with them through nonprofit board service or somewhere else, is definitely a useful thing to do.
So even though nonprofit work isn't always sort of the natural path to corporate boards, depending on the size of the organization, sounds like it might enable your networking.
Yes. And I was going to make that point as well. I would encourage anyone who's thinking about serving on a nonprofit, first and foremost, easy for me to say, it's important for you to be passionate about whatever the mission is of that not-for-profit and very engaged in what they're trying to do. But you should also, as presuming that you've established that, when you think about whether or not that service on that board is likely to help you secure a board seat at a for-profit entity. Looking at who else is serving on that board, for example, here in Chicago, I'm just going to use an example. The Museum of Science and Industry is filled with all the captains of industry here in Chicago, right? All the CEOs are serving on that board. Field Museum is similar. So the big cultural institutions, at least here in town, are great places for people to, if you're going to be on that board and perhaps take on some committee responsibility or whatever it might be, to get yourself in front of these very influential, oftentimes CEOs. And if you impress those people and they say, well, look at that terrific chief marketing officer, that terrific general counsel, or whatever your role might be. Next time those guys or gals get a call from either another board member who's networking on their own behalf or a search firm saying, can you recommend someone? They'll say, hey, I don't work with this person, but we serve together on the board of XYZ cultural institution, and he or she has really impressed me with their ability to do whatever it is they're doing. And it's often the case that those kinds of recommendations can get you onto the radar screen of people who are in a position to consider you for board service.
Okay, so you're sort of gaining some internal champions through that service. Okay, No, that's really good advice. I wanted to ask you about, Lisa, what you were saying about making sure, are you regularly spending time in your own boardroom? So is it safe to say if you haven't had to, build a case and gain board buy-in in your own company's boards, then you're probably not ready?
I hate to make such a blanket statement, but I will tell you that one of the things we look at when we are assessing whether someone is ready to step up and be on a public company board, if they haven't spent any time in their own boardroom, it probably means that they still have some work to do on their own development to get ready. Again, it's not fair to say, let's be clear. Active executives, someone who is got a full-time day job, typically is only able to serve on one board. Okay, so you can't say to that person, well, you have to have board experience in order to get board experience. They can only do the one. But one of the things that is an indicator for us that they are in fact ready for that kind of responsibility is their own time in their own boardroom and exposure to those directors. If you're a couple layers down from your CEO and you're not yet spending time in your own boardroom, you probably aren't ready, to be perfectly clear and transparent. Okay. But there are things you can do. As I said before, what you want to do at that point then is advocate for yourself. Go to the person you report to and say, hey, listen, I have this aspiration. I know I'm not quite ready. I'm not fully cooked yet, but I would like you to help me get there, get to the point where, help me get into the kinds of roles where I would be exposed in my own boardroom so that I can gain that experience and be ready when to be considered for these kinds of roles.
And Virginia, that's something that when we're writing for our candidates, again, most of ours have that exposure within their own boardrooms. That is always going to be a part of the story and the resume and in the bio and the personal profile section. So that's something that I'm always on the lookout for, so that I can weave that into the story, because we're gonna.
Showing how your interactions or your communications with the board help to drive the strategy or shift the strategy or advance something.
That or even just presenting on, in your particular area of expertise, but knowing how to navigate the board space and how that works, it's quite a bit different than anywhere else in the company. So just having that familiarity is going to be beneficial.
Well, and the other thing I want to emphasize is, you're in the boardroom, you're presenting to those board members, you're interacting with those board members, but you're also listening and hearing the kinds of questions those directors ask. And because to me, and Adam brought this up before, but I want to come back to it. One of the things that is, I think, the toughest transition for someone who hasn't yet served externally, and they're in a full-time day job, but they haven't been on a board yet. One of the hardest things for them to figure out is that difference between management and governance. As a board member, you're not there to run the company. You're not there to tell the executives what to do. You're there to help them think about the strategy. You're there to be at a 30,000 foot level. And one of the ways that executives can take off the executive hat and put on the board member hat is by literally the osmosis of listening to really smart, really qualified directors ask questions. And it is asking questions, not being directive. Hey, Mr. Chief Marketing Officer, this is what you should do. A director should never be saying that. They should be saying, have you thought about, or have you considered, or help me understand more about whatever the topic might be. And there's nothing like
trying to guide older young adult children versus telling them what to do when they're younger.
Yep.
Maybe, but that's something that is that invaluable experience is kind of the only place you can get that is in your own boardroom.
No, that is some good advice. Yeah.
And to Adam's point, one of the things we really emphasize when we are presenting our client executives, and we drill down on this to great detail when we're doing their references with their board members, is what do you think this executive has learned in your boardroom? How is that going to help them to be more effective and more valuable to the boardroom they joined? That's a huge piece of what we try to impart, or what Adam tries to impart when he writes profiles for us.
Absolutely.
So you have, to sort of, as part of my last question, you have outlined some steps that people can take if they are interested in pursuing a public or paid board opportunity. You reference getting board time, learning from people that are skilled in governance. You've referenced maybe even joining a nonprofit board, recognizing that your peers on that board might have experience in the boardroom and they could serve as internal champions. Are there any other paths to corporate boards? Like, is serving in a startup space, is that a road that people can take? What are there any other avenues that people could explore?
Yeah, I think certainly to the extent that a startup board, again, might have private equity people serving on that board, and they are always on the lookout for great talent and always on the lookout for people they could put onto other portfolio company boards. The other thing I don't want to leave out, and this is me, prior to JamesDruryPartners, I spent 22 years at Spencer Stewart. So I'm putting on the executive search hat for a brief moment, which is to say that when people who are open to board service and available for board service are networking, don't forget to network with the search firms. They do, as I mentioned before, 30% of the board appointments in any given calendar year. So making the search firms aware that you are interested in, available for, and have permission to serve externally is really important. They're only going to call you if they have a search that makes sense, right? Their ability to be helpful to somebody who's searching for a position is limited by whatever they're working on at any given moment. However, if they're working on something that's a match, having your background and profile and resume in their system is a way to ensure that they'll know who you are and they can reach out to you for appropriate opportunities. They're not
it's not unlike when a job seeker is looking for a job. The recruiter doesn't work for you, they work for the organization, but having them as part of your network can help to keep you top of mind when an opportunity presents itself. Absolutely. Yep. Well, guys, thank you so much. You have demystified a lot for me and I'm hoping my audience. I really appreciate you outlining this path because you can't Google it, or I haven't been able to Google it before. So speaking with you and understanding who your audience is when you're writing your documents, how you should go about networking, just very, very insightful.
Well, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure speaking with you, Virginia, and we're always happy to help provide some insight and illuminate the space a little bit. There are a lot of people out there that would be great on boards, but that aren't serving on them right now. So
Exactly. Well, if people want to connect with you, I have shared on your bios, the J Drury Partners website, their LinkedIn profile, as well as your own individual LinkedIn profile. So those are the best places to learn more and connect.
Yes.
Yep, definitely.
Well, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia. We appreciate the opportunity.
You've been listening to The Resume Storyteller with Virginia Franco. To learn more about storytelling strategies to catch the eye of today's online skim hiring and decision makers, please visit www.virginiafrancoresumes.com.